Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great episode or a special episode of the Fifth Dimension Live Video Podcast. Our last show was horrific because YouTube had a bad outage. So, podcasters and people in radio know sometimes those things are out of our hands. And so, we're doing our show over this week. I'm one of your co hosts, Matthew J. Haas, and across the way is my other co-host, Mr. Dave Schumacher. Dave, we're doing episode 17 over again.
Yes, we are. Yeah. It was a little bit problematic from my end. I don't know. It could have been the YouTube thing, but I also had some internet problems and just wasn't good. And it was a very, very long list of names and papers, which I'm going to assume that it may have been a little boring. And I'm going to approach it a little differently today. So we'll see what happens. We'll give this another try.
Yeah, we're gonna give it another try. Like I said, we had some really technical issues, and it was just, yeah, it was difficult to get through the show. But yeah, we're going to do it over. So the topic that we're doing over, which I think is a really neat topic because it could point people in a good direction of really good literature and really get a good background on some of the key players that have impacted the paranormal field over the decades. So that's what we're getting into. So the topic is key players and literature that have really impacted the paranormal field over the decades. There's quite a few people out there. We may leave a name or two out. I know Dave has got some really good books and literature that he's going to go over. I got some key players on my list that I'm going to go over that have really impacted the field. So I guess without further ado, well, before we start, I just like I always want to get out of the way. If you guys want to contact us about the topic, if you want to chat live with us during the show, go to our YouTube channel, look up the Fifth Dimension Live Video Podcast on YouTube. Go to our YouTube channel, and there's a chat room to the right of the video feed. Hit subscribe to our show with the little bell at the top right corner of the screen. You can also download the YouTube app, which is free, and I believe you can chat with us using the app as well. Hate mail goes to fifth dimension radio show at gmail.com. Um, you can look us up on Facebook if you want to comment or give us feedback either on YouTube or Facebook. It's the Fifth Dimension Radio Show, I believe, on Facebook. Um, I think that's about it. So I guess without further delay, we're just gonna get into the topic because we got a lot to go over. So if you guys want to chat live, go ahead. You got questions about some of the names or books that we bring up, go right ahead. Dave, I'll give you the first crack at what you got going on there.
Okay. What I'm going to do, my first start is going to be with the different societies. Since we covered individuals on the one that didn't work out so well, I'll leave that up to you if you want to highlight some individuals. But as far as societies that are professional and have been around for a very long time, the first one is the Ghost Club, which started in
Hmm.
1862. Charles Dickens, Henry Sedgwick was part of that. Harry Price became a big member and put some life back into that group later on. And then there's the Society for Psychical Research in 1882, and that's William Barrett, Lord Raleigh, both physicists who founded that group, and that's still in existence today. And they put out one of the parapsychology journals. The next one would be the Americans, not to be undone by anything going on over in Europe, came up with the American Society of Psychical Research in 1884. And some of the original founders, psychologists, people who are kind of the fathers of the American Society of Psychical Research and some fathers of parapsychology, William James, let's see, Charles Sedgwick, and Gardner Murphy. Those were some of the big ones. They also put out a journal, and they still do a parapsychology journal. Then there's the Parapsychology Foundation, which was founded in 1951. Eileen Garrett, and they have the International Journal of Parapsychology. And then, of course, there's the Parapsychological Association, which was founded in 1957, and I just upped my associate membership there
Nice.
They have a
Congrats.
great, yeah. There's tons of information. It's a little pricey, but it's worth it because you get all access to all the journals of parapsychology as well as their Mindfield bulletin and a lot of exclusive content that you can find out a real lot of information on parapsychology, and they do have a fair amount on ghosts and hauntings.
Mhm.
And then the other one I want to mention right off the bat is the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. They've been around since 1981, and they're kind of to me they're a combination and an interface between the academic societies, some of the ones I've mentioned, and academic researchers, and then the hobbyists or paranormal investigators, ghost hunters. They have a whole bunch of different people involved in that group, but they've always taken a very analytical, data driven approach to everything they do. So they obviously have some skeptics as part of their group, but they have believers, they have researchers, they have real scientists. I know for a while, Jason Braithwaite, which is a neuroscientist, was part of that organization, I believe, when he was in graduate school. So those societies and some of the names that come up just with those societies are kind of the starting point for me on where it's all based and where it came from. And I'm going to mention my first book, then I'll throw it over to you. So this one,
Ghost hunters.
Ghost Hunters. It's by Deborah Blum. She's a professor at the University of Wisconsin Madison, and she actually came down and did one of the conferences. Spoke at one of the conferences Jen organized back in the day for the Southern Wisconsin Paranormal Research Book, and it got a nice little autograph there.
Nice.
But it's a great book because it basically tracks William James and the search for scientific proof of life after death. So if anybody's interested in kind of an entry level historical perspective of how that all started with William James and the Society for Psychical Research, that's a good place to start. So I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to Matt to come up with his first batch of people and things he wants to talk about.
All right, great. Thanks, Dave. Um, yeah, I think you did a quick mention of the ASPR. I want to go over a little bit more about ASPR because they do have some free journals on their website. Their website has got a lot of great information and background about what they cover and what they get into. Um, some of their records in their library and their database, as far as their journals and catalogs and stuff like that. So if you go to the ASPR.com, they have a couple of links right on their main page that can send you to some of the great articles and journals that are free. And I mention it because it's free. You don't got to pay for it, and there's some really great information on what they cover. But they have some like records that go back to like the early 1600s, which I think is really fascinating to go that far back. And I think the ASPR cover a lot of great topics. Just to give a little more background about them, this is just a little snippet off of their website, so it's not something that I wrote up. So, but the ASPR stands for basically the American Society for Physical Research. Is one of the oldest physical research organizations in the United States. It was founded in 1885 by a distinguished group of scholars, like Dave mentioned, and scientists who shared the same courage and vision to explore the uncharted realms of human consciousness. Their leaders included, like Dave had mentioned, Harvard psychologist and professor of philosophy William James, the inventor of the Xerox, believe it or not, Chester Carlson. There was a quantum physicist, David Bohm, and it says in the ASPR lab, they have heavily studied the Gonsfeld research along with ESP and collected cases of personal ESP and surveyed near-death experiences. And again, their website is aspr.com. They have free journals, and like I said, some of their stuff dates back all the way to the 1600s. So that's first on my list. Um, so I think that's pretty cool, Dave, that they have stuff that dates that far back.
Yeah, they've been at it for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's the founding and the basis for psychical research, or what we call parapsychology today. And one of the interesting things is that they originally started out and were formed to start investigating claims of people communicating with spirits. So they looked at mediums and channeling and wanted to take a scientific look at that, and then it evolved to look at ghosts and hauntings and apparitions, and eventually, as it evolved more into a parapsychology association, it looked more at the academic and focuses a little bit more on the lab work. There's still a field component, and that field component today would be known as spontaneous cases. And
Right,
we used to
right.
do a lot of the spontaneous case investigations. So, that's kind of where if you're in this field and you're a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator, that's kind of your roots. That's where everything came from. Of course,
Yeah,
there's Harry Price and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and all those people that did kind of their independent thing, but they became part of the Ghost Club. But then the Society of Psychical Research and the American Society of Psychical Research, those are the ones that really got the scientists together to start looking at it. So they don't do a whole lot of field investigation
right.
anymore, kind of up to the hobbyists. But again, if you have an interest in this field, it's really two groups, especially the American one, because you can go to New York and visit them.
Yeah,
There's two groups you should be taking a look at and excuse me, and check out their websites.
yeah, definitely. Another one I have on my list, which I mentioned on the last episode, but I'm just kind of just retouching a little bit, because I got a little more background on him. But he has a lot of literature out there and actually still exists if you're interested in reading some of his literature. One of the reasons I bring this gentleman up is because he actually helped invented some of the terminology that's quite popular and used in the paranormal phenomena. So Charles Fort in the 1920s was an American writer and researcher who specialized in anomalous phenomena. He was one of the pioneers in collecting paranormal anecdotes, which inspired Fort to write about the occult and the supernatural. He has over probably a couple hundred books out there. I'm not sure how many that he has, but Fort is known for the credit of inventing terminology such as falls of frogs, fishes, spontaneous human combustion, ball lightning, and poltergeist events. So I have this gentleman. Um, Moving on to my other list, I have notes everywhere.
Yeah,
Uh,
I have about three piles of books, so I'll be
yeah,
reaching and going off camera a few times. I got some
yeah,
journal articles too that I
yeah,
actually print copies of. So, all
yes.
right, keep going, Matt.
Yeah, so if you see me moving around, that's why, because I got notes everywhere. So, all right. So, again, on the last episode, I think this is a really important person to mention. J.B. Ryan, obviously the founder of, Ryan Institute, which was, a branch of Duke University, which was one of the few universities in our country to offer, study of parapsychology and psychic phenomena. So J.B. Ryan, he was a mediator of parapsychology, and he also has some, I think, journals and whatnot into a lot of scientific journals out there. um, just going over some background of him. So we actually, on another podcast that I used to have, we had the very honor and privilege to interview his daughter, Sally Ryan Feather, who still continues their research at Ryan Institute. Um, Bear with me here because I got notes everywhere. So,
Yeah, I think if I remember right, he was a botanist. So was his wife, Louisa Ryan. They were botanists by training, and they came and, as you said, founded the Duke University, the Ryan Institute, which would have been the parapsychology groups. So pretty influential. I think she, as you dig up some more stuff on him, I think she's the one who kind of collected spontaneous cases of psi or ESP, including ghosts and hauntings. And yeah, I think you'll hit on it. But he talked a lot, or he did a lot of his work was laboratory based.
yeah, it was laboratory based because they used Duke University a lot. They had their laboratory there, which eventually separated from the university to become its own institute.
Yep.
So, um, yeah, so it says here Ryan tested many students as of as volunteer subjects in his research project. His first acceptable subject in the ESP research was Adam Linsmeyer, an economics undergraduate at Duke in 1931. Linsmeyer scored very highly in preliminary Zener card tests that Ryan ran him through initially, scored 100%. Wow, correct on two short 9 card series tests that Ryan gave him. Even in his first long test, a 300 card series, Linsmeyer scored 39.6 correct scores, which chance would have been only 20%. He consecutively scored 36% each time on 325 card series, chance being 20%. However, over time, Linsmeyer's scores began to drop down much closer, but still above chance averages. So the following year, Ryan tested another promising individual, Hubert Pierce, who managed to surpass Linsmeyer's overall 1931 performance. Pierce's average during the period tested in 1932 was 40%, whereas chance would have been 20%. However, Pierce was actually allowed to handle the cards most of the time. He shuffled out to cut them. Um, some of the most famous series of experiments, which is why I'm going over this, from Ryan's laboratory, is arguably the ESP test involving Hubert Pierce and Joseph Gaither Pratt, a research assistant. Pierce was tested using Zener cards by Pratt, who shuffled and recorded the order of the cards in the parapsychology lab 100 yards from where Pierce was sitting in a campus library cubicle. The series comprised 37 25 trial runs conducted between August 1933 and March of 1934. From run to run, the number of matches between Pratt's cards and Pierce's guesses was highly variable, generally deviating significantly above chance, but also falling dramatically below chance. The scores were obtained irrespective of the distance between Pratt and Pierce, which was arranged either 100 or 250 yards. It goes on and on and on and on, but you can go to the Ryan Institute website. I believe I'll throw the link in the chat, but they also have a lot of journals and a lot of free stuff on their website from past tests
Hmm.
tests and stuff that they have done in their laboratory. And I think it's important because J.B. Ryan, I think, had a huge impact on that kind of research, and he's got a lot of great work on his website, and they continue to follow his line of work.
Yep. Yep. And his wife worked with him, and she did a lot of work on spontaneous cases, including ghosts and hauntings. And a lot of her findings can be found in the Journal of Parapsychology. And she looked for general trends. It's pretty interesting. If you look at some of that original work, as well as Sedgwick and Gertrude Schmelder, they really looked at the first what people were reporting as apparitions, everything from crisis apparitions to end of life dreams and visions to spontaneous cases of psi or cognition, precognition out in the field. And it's pretty interesting. If you look at some of their original findings, they're applicable to today. A lot of
Hmm.
times that data is pointed to as being, the original work and what set some of the characteristics and criteria for what people consider an experience with an apparition. I mean, it's kind of funny. They found that most people, they experienced or saw apparitions during daylight in normal hours in their home. They didn't have chains around their neck. They looked like normal people. A lot of times you didn't know you were seeing a ghost until after it was gone. Um, they looked just like us. So you look at some of that stuff and think about what they do on the TV shows and what you hear these days. Well, there's shadows, and I saw a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, and I'm running scared through this haunted place only at night. Their original work would say sometimes the best chances of seeing a ghost or an apparition is
Hmm.
under normal conditions. So it's just
Yeah,
kind of interesting to see how much things have changed and diverged from the original work that the Rhines did and the ASPR and the SPR did, and how
sure.
much different it is today.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm going to throw in one book since you started bringing up Rhine and telepathy and ESP. This is one of the originals by Tyrell. It's Apparitions, and it uses source material from the big surveys, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And he proposed that ghosts were nothing more than telepathically induced hallucinations. Basically, what happened is the whatever the consciousness of the ghost that would survive death would implant kind of by telepathy a seed in your subconscious, and that would kind of form and bubble up through into your consciousness, and you would have an apparitional experience. So he thought it was all telepathically induced hallucinations where you're picking up on this little uh, thought or idea pattern from the ghost, the entity, the spirit. So it's a pretty interesting idea. How relevant it is today, that they do still cite that as a potential
yeah. I was just gonna say they
hypothesis
still,
for
yeah.
ghosts and hauntings. But it gets pretty complicated if you start wondering, well, how do you have collective experiences? Okay, well, everybody's hallucinating. That's what he would say. It was a telepathic hallucination, and everybody was hallucinating. And then what about object movement, if there is some? Well, if it's not a natural cause, if you hopefully ruled out most of that. It's like, well, it's mind over matter. It's psychokinesis. It's moving everything from the living person.
Hmm.
So it opens up a whole lot of interesting conversation on what a ghost really is. So I just wanted to mention that since
Yeah, no,
kind of
it's
this was well before Ryan, but you're getting into the ESP area, and I just wanted to mention that one.
yeah, yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, no, it's that hypothesis is still, kind of discussed today. I've even mentioned it on a couple of episodes where, they've modified the idea a little bit, but some people are saying that why is it that only certain people are seeing apparitions over other people, that are in the same line of view of where this person's seeing the apparition, but why isn't other people who are near them seeing the same apparition? And they're saying, is it because are the apparitions communicating with that person on on a telepathy level? And is that the reason that only that person is seeing that apparition? So I think that maybe that stems from that idea.
It does. And then there's another book by Green and McCreary that basically takes a look at that idea, and they conclude by going through all kinds of examples and different types of attributes and things that people have experienced with ghosts, and they conclude that they're nothing more than hallucinations.
Okay.
And it's just really interesting. They talk about, did you just hallucinate the apparition in your normal setting, or did you hallucinate the whole setting as well as the apparition?
Right.
Because they cite some really interesting cases where somebody said, oh, I saw this woman come down the hallway, open the door, and come into my room. And somebody else on the other end of the hallway says, no, I didn't see any of that.
Mhm.
So they use examples like that to argue that they're just merely hallucinations. Now
Right.
they don't really claim where they're coming from, if it's
Mhm.
the dead guy that's consciousness is surviving or not. But again, it really is trending towards it. There's nothing physical in the environment according to their
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And
And there's other things that are causing you to kind of hallucinate that, which hallucination is not a bad word. They're not saying it's an illness or any type of mental disease. It's
right,
just
or you're not
it's a
crazy, yeah.
process.
Right,
Yep.
yeah. No, I get you. And then, just to further add to that, you know, and I'm sure you've come across this yourself, Dave, with cases that you guys have done, but and we've talked about this in many conversations before, but we've come across a lot of our research where a lot of private homes aren't necessarily haunted per se, but a lot of people and the term poltergeist is that terminology is thrown around quite a bit, in the paranormal community, and um, you know,
Mhm.
like the reason I bring up this is because um, the argument and debate over the definition of poltergeist is that um, with the right conditions, adolescents are having some kind of attachment from uh, with the conditions just being right, being surrounded by a body of water, limestone court rocks, mountainous area, that it just the conditions have to just be right for for that particular individual to experience poltergeist activity, and then it latches onto that person because they're going through some kind of form of traumatic changes in their lives, and a lot of parapsychologists argue that they could be manifesting or projecting because of those changes. But I found, Dave, that doesn't necessarily have to be a person of adolescence. I've noticed that it could also be people. It could also be adults with different age
Hmm.
ranges. I feel that if the conditions are just right for that environment, and that person's stress level is also just right. I found that there's a lot of cases where the home is not haunted. It's because of what the person is going through themselves, and I think it falls in the category where they could be projecting that manifestation, and they're projecting a lot of that activity through themselves. But whether it be through a telepathy thing, or whether it be PK, or whether it be hallucination, if it just all falls under that kind of same category.
Yeah, and actually, that leads into another book by called Poltergeist by Gold and Cornell, sorry, Cornell, and they look at the different items and phenomena that happen during various poltergeist and haunting reports and cases. And one of the things they wanted to look at is, are they really two distinct types of phenomena?
Hmm.
So they looked at everything and did a cluster analysis. And according to them, they think there's two different types of phenomena. And the real difference seems to be person centered versus place centered. So,
Right, right.
in traditional sense, that people would say or label something a haunting if it's place centered. And then if it's person centered, they look more at maybe a potential poltergeist. But there's literature in the published peer reviewed parapsychology journals where parapsychologists, researchers argue, is there really a difference? Because we've seen both phenomena coexist, and
Hmm.
things we thought are haunt phenomena seem to maybe follow people. Of
Hmm.
course, you have that whole misinterpretation, misperception, natural causes, which could be part of that. But the real defining point, even in the book I just showed, is really, is it place centered or person centered? And even with the person centered, you start looking at, whatever it is that's causing the stress, the things that affect supposedly in the environment are symbolic of that. So it can be area focused, object focused, person focused. And William Roll was kind of the founder of the term recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, and he's written a ton of stuff on poltergeists. He's since passed away a while ago, but he was one of the more interesting researchers in that field. And it's really interesting because a lot of people say, well, there's no distance restriction on what objects can move in a poltergeist case, and that argues against traditional physics. And actually, what he found is that the further an object was away from a person, the less it moved, or the less distance it moved. And if it did move close to the person, it faded and dropped quickly as it got further away. So his argument was, well, it actually does somewhat obey certain laws of physics with
Hmm.
object movement and exerting some sort of force on it. It does drop off with distance. So I don't know, a lot of good research out there.
Yeah, definitely. So, and
All
then
right.
I could even throw a twist in that too, and throw around the whole stone tape theory too. And again, if the conditions are just right, and you have a person um that has the right conditions for themselves to manifest or project, from their PK, can their PK be recorded, with the right conditions for stone tape theory? So, it kind of, that you can you know, fall off
Yeah, I
that.
think, yeah, I always find that fascinating. I mean, it's stone tape, residual haunting, place memory, whatever you want to call it. It's always interesting. I'm thinking, if that is actually a real thing, you think you'd have more examples of it, and you'd be able to set up things and study it at certain times.
Sure.
And I'm always like, huh, how come we can't find any of those?
Right.
But it may be possible, and I'm just going to mention a series of more modern experiments where people in Michael Persinger's lab, they created photons by a chemical reaction,
Mhm.
and they
He's
could
another
measure
person
them.
I have on my list too.
Yep, he's a
Yep.
good one.
Yep.
And they used a certain type of time and space varying magnetic field, and they created photons, and they could detect these photons.
Mhm.
And then what they found out is, up to 3 days later, if you didn't do the chemical reaction, so you shouldn't have photons being produced, if they just started the magnetic fields again, they were able to pick up those photons again. So it's almost like there was some sort of environmental space storage that was able to store the photons, and then under the right electromagnetic field conditions, they came back. So he was kind of looking at like, well, that's interesting. You work out some math, and maybe there is something to this place memory or residual haunting. It's really pretty interesting. And then there was another group, Dean Radin and others have done work that show with random number generators when these healers came into an environment and conditioned the space, whatever, I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't understand that conditioning the space for healers, but they did. And they saw a deviation in the random number generator. And then when they left, there was still a deviation up to a couple days afterwards. So there's some little tidbits of potential things that might actually be things you could look at and experiment with what you called stone tape or what others call residual hauntings or place memory. So it's
Sure.
pretty cool.
Yeah. And then Michael Persinger's work is also known for the God helmet, which everybody is familiar with. Which was an experiment done in their laboratory where they would take several test subjects, as far as human subjects, and they would put the helmet on the person and try to create the supernatural experience. They would create a supernatural experience or try to create you know uh, them having experience paranormal experiences with the helmet. So he's on my list. Persinger's work is very familiar. He's a greatly widely recognized individual. Um, so I recommend doing a lot of reading on him. So
Yeah,
um,
you can find any of his publications. I think if you just type in like Persinger publications,
yeah,
he's got a whole website just full of them. There's hundreds.
sure,
And yeah, I got the chance to work with one of his grad students, Joey Caswell, Dr. Caswell now, and we
nice,
published Jen and I published a paper together with him, and he's
cool.
just yeah, a lot of smart people came out of that lab. Really sad that Persinger passed away a couple months ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, so, all right. Next person. Again, I have more of a list of key players,
Yep.
that have impacted the paranormal field over the decades. I bring this person up because there are people saying that this could be a person that kind of coined or was one of the first researchers that introduced EPV, or otherwise known today as electronic voice phenomena. So his name is Adela Saleh, Adela von Saleh, excuse me. So in the 19 30s and 40s, he did a lot of work with investigations, and he was one of the first to actually, him and Raymond Bayless conducted a number of recording sessions with a custom-made apparatus consisting of a microphone and an insulated cabinet connected to an external recording device and speaker. Soleil reported finding many sounds on the tape that could not be heard on the speaker at the time of the recording, some of which recorded when there was no one in the cabinet. He believed that these sounds to be the voices of the disincarnate spirits. Among the first recordings believed to be spirit voices were such messages as "This is G," "Hot Dog Art," and "Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all, friendly spirits." There's a website that has it's kind of funny. Um, there's a lot of background on him. The website is called All About Heaven. Oh, excuse me, All About the Heaven. Yeah, allabout.heaven.org. And there's a lot of background about him and the work that he did with Bayless. So this is in the early 1930s and 1940s and through the 50s. He also has a book out, and I think it's called A Look Behind the Ghost Orchid or something like that. Um, I'm just like reading some. I'm just going over snippets here. So Yeah. He was also actually known as a psychic. He was one of the few reputable psychics that did that line of work. But he wasn't really into his psychic research. He was more into EPV. So there's a lot of his work on this website. So I wanted to mention him because he is believed to be one of the first individuals to introduce EPV or electronic voice phenomena. So which is a big thing today in paranormal investigators line of work. So I just want to throw him out there.
Yep, and Rodov was one of the other big ones way
Yep,
back in the
Rodov.
day.
Yep, the Russian.
Yeah,
Yeah, yep, yep.
yep. So a lot of history there. I'm gonna round out the really old stuff real quick here,
Sure.
so we can keep on with the more modern stuff that we seem to be moving into. So in um, in 1886, the publication of Phantasms of the Living was done, and this was by some of the original researchers that we talked about earlier, Myers, Podmore, Gurney, those of the original societies. And their publication, again, was Phantasms of the Living, where they looked at 700 different reports, and they collected these and they went out and tried to find collaborating testimony, people who could back up, either somebody wasn't there that was there, somebody died at the time that they experienced their apparition or ghost. And these are available. You can actually buy the original publications from, let me pull this up here, Phantasms of the Living by Gurney, and it's been reprinted. It was first printed in 1886, and it was from the Society of Psychical Research. You can actually get these free online. I believe it's Google Books. You can download free copies, or you can buy the paper ones, both volumes 1 and 2. They're just, 10, $15 each, and you can get both of them, which I did. Pretty interesting source case material. And then after that, they did a bigger study. You looked at Mrs. Sedgwick, Myers, Podmore, Johnson, and they did the census of hallucinations, which you can also pick up. And it's from the Proceedings for the Society of Psychical Research, Volume 10, published in 1894. And they sent out questionnaires or a survey to 17,000 people.
Wow.
Have you seen a ghost, an apparition? What have you experienced? And they got 1,684 responses, and they're detailed in that work. And both of these volumes, again, really seem to point towards the hallucination aspect or hypothesis of ghosts. So again, that rounds up my list of older literature, since we seem to be moving into more modern stuff. So I just wanted to shoot those out there, and we can keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Dave, what is some of the oldest literature that you think that is really good, solid groundwork for today's research that you can mention?
Those right there would be some of the oldest.
Yeah, those are the
I mean,
oldest.
you're talking 1800s when the societies were first formed, and they really started to take a serious look at again, mediums, channeling, ghosts, hauntings. So any of that original work by the Society of Psychical Research and the American Society of Psychical Research, Phantasms of the Living, Census of Hallucinations, that's some of the oldest published work that's probably worthwhile digging into.
Right, right. Cool,
And then
cool.
I'll have some newer stuff, which it's sad when you say the 1970s is the newer stuff.
That's funny. Um, I should have done some more research on his background, but another person that I actually think was actually one of the well-known skeptics that were very heavily involved, believe it or not, he was very into the paranormal. Was Carl Sagan. I was a huge fan of Carl Sagan because of his
Mhm.
Cosmos documentaries about space. And when I was a kid, I used to love renting out his Cosmos tapes and popping into the VHS player. And you know uh,
Mhm.
so now Dave mentioned the 70s, and Carl Sagan was very well known in the 70s. So he was into the paranormal because he was more into the UFO phenomenon, because
Mhm.
he was very open to that idea. And actually the movie Contact was an inspiration
Mhm.
off of Carl Sagan. So I wanted to give him a quick mention. I think he's actually a really good key player to mention on the show, because he has some really good literature out there as well. So Carl Sagan, I love Carl Sagan.
Yeah, he definitely took a skeptical approach to it and
Yeah,
urged the use of data. And there weren't a whole lot of things he was open to in parapsychology,
sure.
but there was a couple things. And
Yeah,
reincarnation, he always thought it was kind of interesting, and it was really interesting, I think, to him because of the scientific people and rigor that investigated it. Ian Stevenson of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, some of the published reports. I think that's one of the things that kind of tweaked Sagan's interest in it. It's like, okay, so there's somebody taking a very in-depth scientific approach to it, collecting case reports and trying to rule out any natural explanations, which there always are still going to be arguably some natural explanations. But there was a couple things within parapsychology he thought that was interesting.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's a good one to mention.
yeah, definitely. So
And now, since you're in the 70s, the first handbook of parapsychology, published in 1977, edited by Woolman, and it is probably the first real parapsychology, I think, textbook that would be worth taking a look at. You can get these for fairly cheap. It's not in publication anymore. It only has 967 pages,
oh,
and it
only.
covers everything from J.B. Ryan's work, to ghosts and hauntings, to spirit photography, to psychokinesis, ESP. It covers pretty much anything. So if you want an older overview of the entire field, where they have hundreds and hundreds of cited peer-reviewed journal articles in here, this would be a good one. I dove into this when we did a couple of our other prior shows to look up some of the historical work in the parapsychology field. So that's an old one. And then the precursor, the new one, is Parapsychology, a handbook for the 21st century. So we've gone from the 70s to at least the 21st century. This is another good one. You can actually get this on, you can buy the hard copy. It's a little pricey. I don't know, 80, $90, but
Wow,
the
that's the most
uh,
expensive book I ever heard.
oh no, I got one that's probably more than that. All my old biology textbooks from college. Those are like $120 back in the day, I'll say. But this one again is kind of it takes what was in the original handbook and looks at it with new data, new publications, where are we at with the field. And you can get this, you could actually get the ebook on Google Books for like $19.
Hmm.
So that's a good deal. A lot of times if you buy the paperback, you get the ebook as well. This one I really like because they do cover all aspects of parapsychology. They do talk about apparitions, poltergeists, ghosts, hauntings. And I'm really surprised, since you brought up EVP, they actually have a chapter on EVP and
Really?
ITC in
Wow.
that book, which is surprising because most parapsychology uh, researchers won't even talk about EVP. They're just like, nope, 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 not going there, not going to talk about it. But
Right.
it has a really nice summary of the history of EVP and the current state of the research, which there's not a lot, but there are some published papers and there's some stuff that you could take a look at, and you can look those references up and take the book as a starting point and move on.
Right.
They also talk about different ways to investigate, to do field investigations. How do you go about it with going out and maybe just collecting case reports? Are you doing an observational approach? Excuse me. Are you collecting environmental data? How to do that? What are the limitations? What to look at? What's been found? And there's also a chapter on, which I like, is basic statistics that should be used in parapsychological research. So it's a wealth of information. It's a lot of stuff. It's kind of a college level textbook. So if you like light reading, that's not the book for you. But it's a really good book to get an overview of parapsychology, and there's a good chunk of it on ghost hauntings and poltergeists and EVP as well.
Yeah. Um, question for you, Dave.
Yep.
Now, if you look back at all the literature that we just mentioned and all the key players that we just mentioned, I mean, the list could go on and on. There's a lot of information out
Yep.
there. Um, I've noticed the difference in the literature back then versus today. I'm not taking away the credit of the work of people of today, but I noticed there's a big lack of literature based on good data and their actual research versus an anecdote or versus, stories or, urban legends or, all these like cool locations that we're researching. There's more of that stuff. There's more supernatural stuff. I don't see a lot of hypothesis books. I don't see a lot of, like what we're talking about on this particular episode. I don't see enough literature today about that kind of stuff. Um, it's kind of lacking.
It as far as excuse me, as far as publicly available, go to your bookstore, look for a book on the bookshelf, stuff that people like everyday books you would read. There isn't. There really is not a lot. There's very little. But if you look, for example, excuse me, boy, early mornings are not good for the boys. We went and saw a band yesterday, and we were yelling at each other to talk, so that's
But
probably
that could have something to do with
why. A
it.
lot of fun, but hard time talking this morning. But you got to know where to look. I thought I had a fairly good grasp of what the literature is prior and current, and things that are being published. Excuse me, in parapsychology. And when I re-upped my Parapsychological Association membership, and I opened up their latest issue of Mindfield Bulletin, uh, Carlos Alberto, he lists any and all journal articles that deal with parapsychology. And I was surprised. There are 3 to 4 pages of references. So it's a heck of a lot more than I thought. And obviously, it might be a lot more than you thought. But
Mhm.
the real problem is this stuff is not easily and readily accessible to people, to the normal
Mhm.
hobbyist, paranormal investigator, paranormal researcher.
Do
You
you think
really
it
need
should
to,
be?
it should be, it really should be. But a lot of those journals, you have to pay to get the journal or pay to read the article. So it's not really available. And it's a real shame. And I've spent a considerable amount of money buying articles because I want to read them. And again, you're right, though, Matt, there isn't a lot out there.
Because
The 2 parapsychology books I put up are probably the best summary you could get these days. And I mean, you could do this one, Surviving Death.
mhm.
A journalist investigates evidence for the afterlife by Leslie Keene. But again, it's very broad, but it does cover a lot of the topics from in the past up to date. But again, you're right. There is not a lot out there that people, and I'm going to put the caveat on there, that people cannot easily access and find. That's
Right.
the problem.
Right, right. And it should be. And I think it should be because then we can, you know, take that groundbreaking work and compare it to today's work that we're doing and see how we can make things better, make the comparisons and improve the things that were thrown in that literature and, that research. And um I think it would help move the field forward a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to get an overview, again, here's you can get these. Google Books has them. I think $15 for the ebook, and it's an introduction to parapsychology by Irwin and Carolyn Watt, and it covers a whole lot of the recent stuff, which would be a good one to get. I mean, that's probably the cheapest, easiest way you're going to have access to current thinking in the field.
Mhm.
And the other one, which I'm surprised, this used to be over $100 book, Hauntings and Poltergeist, Multidisciplinary Perspectives. And it's edited by James Haran and Rents Ling. And you can get this for the ebook for $17 on Google Play Books as well.
Nice.
And this is focused just on ghosts, hauntings, and poltergeists. And it talks about probably, like you said, where would you find hypothesis, theories, what work's been done? This is a little older, and I believe, let me check the publication date on this. This is a little older, but it was published in 2001. So it'll get you up to speed and at least get you into the 2000s.
Mhm.
And for $17 ebook, hey, might as well. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Matt. There is not a lot of easily accessible information as far as academic stuff. It costs money
Yeah.
and it's hard to find.
Right, right. And you would think that with, you know, the publication companies, they've made it easier for writers and people who want to write. They've made it easy for like publishing your own work, publishing your own books. They've made it easy for people now, with the
Yeah,
companies that, like Amazon and, Amazon's a big one, but there's a lot of other companies out there other than Amazon that allow people to publish their own work, without having to cost you a lot of money. Because I do understand that it does cost you if you want to publish your own stuff on your own. But I don't know. It's when you look at the literature back then compared to now, there's not enough, like you said, there's not enough easy access to it. And not only that, but I find there's a lot of lacking of that kind of information in today's literature.
again, I think it might be out there, but people don't know it. They just don't know
Right.
it, and
Right.
it's not easy to access. That's the
Yeah.
problem, or access.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it's just not easy to do that. So I mean, I do on my our group's Facebook page, paranormal research group. I post journal articles. I'll
Mhm.
provide links. So anything I come across that might be interesting, I link. Sometimes they're free, sometimes they're not, but it's out there. It's just that people don't really know where to go and how to get them, and some of them cost money. So it's unfortunate, but it's one
Yeah.
of the things. Shows like this. Hopefully, we can highlight those things and point people in the direction to get it.
Yeah, exactly, which is why we're doing this episode. We thought it'd be very helpful to guide people to access this literature. And my
Yep.
wife is sneezing in the background. Bless you.
So I got two more books, then that'll be it for my books. I promise. Um,
Okay. I just want to make a quick mention. We have a guest in the chat room. We have Lourdes. She's in the chat room. She's one of my team members. We want to give a quick mention to her. Good morning, Lourdes. This is our one and only person in the chat room.
Well, it's early morning. Nobody else is up
I
yet.
know, usually, like, I'm drinking a beer or having a glass of wine, but I'm having my morning coffee.
But that mug is quite impressive. I'm talking about your coffee mug. Okay, so books. Let me see. I think this one was 85 or 86. This is Lloyd Hour, 1986. Lloyd
Another
Auerbach,
and
ESP
another key
Hauntings.
player.
Yep, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, a parapsychologist handbook. Um, Even got my signed copy from Lloyd. He signed it when he was
Cool.
at a conference we had him come in and talk at. But this is the one of the original books that got me interested in it. That's where I learned that wow, there's actually people that can do research and get masters and PhDs in parapsychology, or at least parapsychology topics. Your degree is psychology, but you could get a parapsychology degree back in the day. So that's a really good book that talks about ghost hauntings and poltergeists and extrasensory perception. And he kind of wraps in a lot of the stuff he learned back in the day in school and some of the older literature into some modern thinking. It's more of a ghost hunting, paranormal research, investigator type book, but it's really good. And then this one, which has just come out, it's been republished, a new edition. It's the guidance notes for investigators of spontaneous cases, apparitions, haunting, poltergeists, and similar phenomena by Steve Parsons, and associated and supported by the Society for Psychical Research.
Cool.
And to me, this is a basic investigation guideline book that anybody in the field should pick up and read. Very basic, but really good information. It'll give you a good start. So
Yeah.
that's it for my books. And
But
then, depending on what else you got, I got some journal articles that I won't go into detail about, but some good ones people should pick up and read.
yeah, we're gonna Dave, if you don't mind, again, we were gonna mention on our last week's show when we had terrible technical issues, but if we can put a list of all this literature and key list of key names and people where we can guide people to get this accessible information, we can recommend, the things that we just talked about on this episode, and maybe put it somewhere on our Facebook page would be great.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. That's doable. Just
yeah.
takes time to
So
type those up.
yeah,
I
yeah,
probably have
no,
most of them, but it takes time.
yeah. Or you could just re-listen to the episode.
There
You
you
know,
go. There you go. And then
you
the
know.
last one, I'm going to put this book in and be done with books. Investigating Ghosts, The Scientific Search for Spirits by Benjamin Radford, 2017. It's a really good book on how to critically look at these things and how to investigate it using like a scientific investigative method. So that's a good book as well.
Great. And
All right.
all these books involve reading.
Yeah, you actually have
You
to
have
read.
to read.
I love reading.
You know,
I got a lot of books, a lot of
even
books.
even I admit, Dave, like I need to read a lot more. You know, I mean, I've noticed that actually in the last 5 years or so, I've been doing a lot more research as far as reading and stuff. So, I've been getting back into reading a lot of good information that's out there.
Good,
So,
good.
it
Yeah, when
stimulates your brain. It makes you learn.
it does. And when we moved last year, I couldn't believe how many boxes of books.
Oh, I can't imagine what your library looks like.
Oh my, yeah, and I got a whole bookshelf upstairs on the main floor that's mainly parapsychology, paranormal, little bit of my old college texts and some statistics stuff, but most of it's all paranormal parapsychology, and then boxes and boxes of journal articles that I've collected over the years. So it's good to read. You got to read. You got to continue learning. There's a lot of good stuff, and you just need to keep up and keep at it.
Yeah. Eventually, when we move to wherever we're gonna move in, probably in a couple of years or whatever, but I want a room with just like a bunch of uh bookshelves and just store a lot of good reading material. But I want my own library room. So. Anyway, so if you guys are tuning in late to our show, we're redoing this episode. Last week, we YouTube had an outage, so it just made the show, difficult to go through. So, what the topic we're doing is key players and literature that has impacted the paranormal field over the decades. Dave has mentioned quite a few really good books. Hopefully, when we get some free time, we'll list those books and people on our Facebook page. If you go to the Fifth Dimension Radio Show on Facebook, you can get that information up there.
Yep.
Um, hopefully we'll get that up and running on there within a week or so. Just give us some time, to get that up there. But if you want to email us, give us some feedback on people we may have missed. Again, we can only add so many people under an hour. We have so many more people to go through. Maybe we could do a couple episodes on this, but um, if you missed anybody or if we missed anybody that you think is important that we should throw out there on our list or somebody to talk about or their line of work or research, email us at fifth dimension radio show at gmail.com. Or you can just leave a comment on our YouTube page and just throw a comment up there. So what else, Dave?
One last one that you can get some really good free information. It's publicparapsychology.org. And if you
Nice.
go to that website, they have an apparitional experiences primer, a temperature and haunting experiences, a basic primer for paranormal enthusiasts, a haunting and a haunting primer.
Nice.
So these are all things that kind of summarize what is currently known in the field and where things are at. So that's a really good free resource, completely free. You can download them and read them. I've posted them on our Facebook page and our website a couple times. They're that good if you want a basic knowledge base.
Yeah, definitely.
But
Um,
yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to tackle all the journal articles in another episode, I guess. We'll get those next time. There's some good stuff there on helps you figure out. There's some good journal articles that provide methods and ways to go about investigating and
yeah,
how to look at things on a if you want to do a scientific study where you could actually publish it.
right, right. Yeah, we could probably do like a 5-hour episode just on that.
Oh, I know I could. People
Yeah,
laugh at me, but I could. All
yeah.
right.
So, all right. So, we finally, I think, hopefully, we didn't make it as boring this time as we did on our last show. We just basically just had this huge list that we just kept like running, our list, back and forth. But hopefully, hopefully, we were more informative, and hopefully, you can retain this information, and we guided you into the right direction. How to access this stuff. And Dave had some really good suggestions on what books to read, and we talked about some really good key players that really impacted the field. And here I go, my throat is starting to go on me too. Um, s we're not used to doing this in the morning, so bear with us. We had a successful episode. We finally got through it. Again, all hate mail goes to fifth dimension radio show at gmail.com. I don't know, just guys, keep reading, keep learning. Whatever books that are out there, there are some good, really good books, and then there's some really bad books out there. Just got to weed out the element, and just do a lot of reading. Just do a lot of research on your own. There is a lot of stuff that's available.
Absolutely. So
You know. All right. So, any last closing thoughts, Dave? Or
no, I think you summed it up. Keep reading, keep learning. It is hard to find some of this stuff, but it is out there. There's a lot of good information. One last thing I can mention is if you look at a site called Lexion, Lexscien, you can sign up, and for a relatively small amount of money, you have access to all the parapsychology journals and information. So, just one more thing that's kind of taking all the information and putting it in one spot. Those might be
nice.
the easiest way to get the information at this point, is to look at where the people have kind of taken it and putting it together for you. You got to pay for it, but it's worth it if you really want to learn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. I agree. All right, guys. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the day on your Sunday here. I have a team meeting later. Lourdes, thanks for joining us in the chat room. I know there wasn't much going on in the chat room, but yeah, I'll see my guys later. So they're all coming over later for a team meeting.
Cool.
So look forward to that. Yep. All right. Dave, I'll talk to you after the show. But I
Right.
hope everybody enjoys the rest of their weekend.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. Take care, guys.